Hello again. Friday's come round as the weeks fly by. I've been thinking about thinking. You know, our thinking is conditioned by the patterns we've made and adopted over many years. And it's really hard to change those patterns. I found that very few people, believers included, can think for themselves. That's like outside the box. We've created a box by external peer pressure, by the media, by indoctrination from all sorts of things. Even the education system, which now is a form of indoctrination instead of education. I came across an old Dutch proverb this week, and this is what it says: "Whose bread one eats, his word one speaks." Think about that, I'll say it again. Whose bread one eats, his word one speaks. We speak how we've been conditioned. Well, real thinking is a constant struggle against the preconceived patterns of our mind. Most people, I include myself, have blind spots, especially about the truth that relates to their own lives or personality. It's often only in the depths of unhappiness, in which delusion and illusion are more painful than reality, that we're prepared to see the truth about ourselves. Often we have to come to the end of ourselves before we're ready to accept the truth and change our thinking. You know, this makes me think about the prodigal son in the pigsty, because he changed his thinking when he came to the end of himself. You know, the pigsty is a wonderful place. It's not a terrible place. It's a place of change. It's a place where you come to yourself and you change your thinking. So, if you know backsliders, don't pray that they'll come back to God if they're not yet in the pigsty. Pray that God will make situations and circumstances so that they come to themselves like the prodigal son, and then they'll change the thinking. He changed from give me my inheritance, to make me a hired servant. He changed his thinking in the pigsty. You know, imagination and myth are often stronger than the truth. A myth is a story, fantasy, that's assumed to be the truth. It's only a myth. And often they're stronger than reality in our own minds. Well, people lose themselves in the great problems of this life to evade facing themselves. People keep busy so they don't have to think about themselves and the situation. It's so easy. So what's the answer? Well, I think the great answer is humility. Because humility is a true assessment of ourselves, not thinking of myself higher or lower than I am. The truth about myself, that's a wonderful way of thinking. You know, pride is the opposite of humility. Pride always distorts our thinking. So let me leave you with a scripture that Paul shares with the Roman believers after he tells them to renew the thinking. Romans 12 verse 2 and 3, very popular, well-known verse. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Change your thinking. And listen to the promise that you may prove, not guess or think, you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. How can you be in the will of God if you haven't got the right thinking, if you've not renewed your mind? And then the rest of the chapter, I've noted 30 different ways of thinking, of changing our attitude. But the very first one in verse 3 says this: "For I say through the grace given unto me, to everyone that's among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God has dealt to every man the measure of faith." Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. That's the way to know yourself, and that will help change your thinking. So let me leave you with this thought. If you think how you've always thought, you'll behave how you've always behaved. The problem is that's not acceptable to God, because we're supposed to be formed or reformed into the very image of Christ. And that means changing our thinking. You'll never change your actions without changing your thinking. So holiness starts with the thinking. It's all in the mind. So I hope I've provoked you again this week. So have a blessed week and change your thinking.